All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be diving deep, deep into Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins,
Oh,
a
yeah.
book that I've heard so much about. It's supposed to be equal parts brutal honesty
Mhm.
and just incredible, incredible feats
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
human achievement. Now, you specifically requested that
Yes.
we focus on Goggins's philosophy,
Hmm.
on mental toughness, how he built it,
Right.
and more importantly, how he applies it.
Yeah, and that's what I think really sets Goggins apart. I mean, he goes so far beyond sort of like surface level self-help, he's really dissecting like the why behind his actions
Right.
with this incredible like intense introspection. Uh
Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart.
it's not for the faint of heart. No, absolutely.
And to really understand that why, I think we need to go all the way back to his childhood because he really doesn't sugarcoat the trauma that he faced growing up.
Yeah.
He paints this really stark picture of growing up in fear with his father, Toughness Goggins Sr., who owned a roller skating rink, successful businessman, completely different person
Oh, wow.
behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's that classic duality, right? You have the charming public persona and then this like terrifying reality at home. And that contrast, I think you see it popping up again and again in Goggins' life. Like he's constantly pushing himself to confront discomfort, almost like he's trying to reconcile those two opposing forces within himself.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if those early experiences, like his family escaping to Indiana to get away from his dad, if that ultimately like shaped his drive to seek out hardship later in life.
Mhm.
He even talks about pressing the panic button
Wow.
during one really violent episode,
Mhm.
which just underscores the level of fear that he lived with.
Absolutely. And it's really crucial, I think, to recognize that we're not trying to glorify suffering here. We're trying to understand how those experiences might have led him to view hardship as this, like, crucible for self-improvement. He seems to believe that by confronting and overcoming pain, he can kind of forge himself into something, stronger.
Which brings us to his early adulthood, where we see him struggling. He was cheating in academics, he's facing setbacks in athletics, even experiencing career disappointments. He was 297 pounds, working as an exterminator.
Wow.
A far cry from the ultra-athlete we know today. It's like he was carrying all this baggage from his past and just hadn't figured out how to channel it yet.
Right. And then he comes to this turning point. He stumbles across a TV show about Navy SEALs, and it's like a light bulb goes off.
Yeah.
He's just captivated by their resilience, their grit, their ability to just push beyond any limits. What's so fascinating to me is that he doesn't just admire them from afar. He decides, I'm going to radically transform my life
Yeah.
and become one of them.
Yeah, and it's a remarkable transformation. He embarks on this intense weight loss journey, sheds over 100 pounds in just 3 months. And a key part of this transformation was his use of what he calls the accountability mirror.
Yes, and this is where you really start to see that mental framework taking shape, because the accountability mirror wasn't just about like checking his physique.
Right.
It was about confronting his weaknesses head on. So he would stand in front of this mirror and force himself to acknowledge all his shortcomings, no matter how uncomfortable it felt.
So how can our listener apply this accountability mirror concept to their own lives?
Well, I think it's about cultivating that same level of brutal honesty with yourself. Like identify those areas where you're making excuses, where you're not living up to your potential. Write them down, put them on your mirror, look at them every day, and then use that awareness to actually, fuel positive change. It's about holding yourself accountable, even when it's tough.
So with this new mindset, Goggins sets his sights on SEAL training, which is,
Arguably one of the most...
arguably the most grueling selection process in the world.
Right.
And his book is just filled with these vivid accounts of Hell Week, the sleep deprivation, the intense physical challenges. I mean, even running on stress fractures just to keep going.
Yeah, and I think this is where the concept of the calloused mind really comes into play.
Yes.
And he's not suggesting that we all become like emotionless robots.
Right.
He's talking about developing this mental resilience that allows you to just face challenges head on without crumbling under pressure. And the way he learned to do this, in part, was by tapping into what he calls the sympathetic response.
Now, for those of us who aren't familiar with that term, could you break down what the sympathetic response is and how Goggins uses it to his advantage?
Sure. So it's essentially your body's fight or flight response. So when you're faced with a perceived threat, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, releases all these hormones like adrenaline, and it prepares you to either confront the danger or run away. Most people view this as something negative, something to be avoided, but Goggins learned to actually harness it, to use that surge of energy
Oh, wow.
to push past his perceived limits.
So he's not trying to suppress that primal instinct. He's actually learning to control it, to direct it
Exactly.
towards achieving his goals. That's fascinating.
And it's important to remember that Goggins isn't just physically tough. He's constantly emphasizing this idea of mental strength,
Right.
the importance of winning the battle in your mind first.
Mm-hmm.
He describes training alongside this guy, Freak Brown, and these two guys, they shared a similar background of just hardship and determination, just pushing each other to their absolute limits.
I bet that camaraderie must have been incredible knowing you're not alone in those challenges.
Absolutely, but even with that support, Goggins knew that the real battle was within himself. He had to conquer his own doubts, his own fears to really succeed.
And speaking of conquering fears, there's this incredible reveal later in the book where we learn that he was actually running on a heart defect for most of his life.
Oh, wild, right. He had an undiagnosed atrial septal defect, which is basically a hole in his heart. It went undetected for years, so he was literally functioning at a reduced capacity
Right.
and still achieving these insane feats. I mean, this really underscores his point that our minds often set these limits on what we believe we can achieve.
Yeah. It's amazing to think that he was pushing himself to those extremes without even knowing about this underlying condition. So how did he even discover it?
So one day, after a particularly intense training session, he just collapses. Blurry vision, exhaustion. He thought he was having a heart attack,
Oh, yes.
had to undergo surgery, go through a period of recovery.
So how does someone like Goggins, who thrives on pushing boundaries, how does he handle being forced to, slow down and recover?
It really is a testament to his adaptability and his commitment to his goals, because he viewed it as just another challenge to overcome. And once he recovered, he went right back to pushing himself, but this time with this newfound awareness of his body's limitations.
It's almost like he's saying, you can throw anything at me, and I'll find a way to adapt and keep moving forward.
Exactly. And I think that's such a powerful message for all of us. It's this idea that we have more resilience than we think we do. We just have to tap into it.
It's incredible. So he finishes Hell Week, overcomes this serious heart condition, and continues to test his limits.
But what happens after his time with the SEALs? Does he ever slow down?
Not a chance. In fact, that's when things get even more interesting. He dives headfirst into the world of ultramarathons,
Wow.
taking on these crazy challenges like the Badwater 135, known for its grueling
Oh
conditions.
my gosh.
And this is where we really see his cookie jar concept in action.
Okay, I've got to hear more about this cookie jar. What is it? How does it tie into mental toughness? Okay, so imagine a jar filled with all your past achievements. Those moments where you overcame adversity, pushed beyond your comfort zone, and succeeded. Whenever Goggins faced what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, he'd reach into his cookie jar
I love it.
and draw strength from those past experiences.
Yeah.
He'd remind himself, hey, I've been through hell and back and I can do it again.
So it's like turning your struggles into fuel
Exactly.
for future challenges. It's like reframing your past experiences and focusing on the strength you gained from overcoming them.
Precisely. And it's a strategy anyone can apply. Think about those times in your life where you faced adversity and came out stronger. Write those down, visualize them, and use them as this source of motivation when things get tough. You're essentially building this reservoir of self-belief
I love it.
that you can draw on when you need it most.
This is such a great takeaway for our listener, right? It's that reminder that we all have those cookies
Yes.
in our past, those experiences that shaped us, that made us more resilient. We just need to remember them
Yes.
and draw on their power when we face new challenges.
Yeah.
It's incredible how he takes these, kind of abstract concepts like calloused mind and cookie jar and makes them tangible, something that you can actually visualize and apply.
I know, right? That's one of the things that's so great about Goggins as a communicator.
Yeah.
He takes these complex psychological principles and he breaks them down into relatable analogies and strategies that you can actually use.
And he doesn't just stick with ultra running. He sets a pull-up world record,
Yeah.
tries to get into Delta Force, even tackles free diving. It's like he's constantly seeking out new ways to test his limits, both physically and mentally.
That's where his philosophy of starting at zero comes in. No matter how much you achieve, there's always another level to reach, another challenge to embrace. Constantly seeking growth, stepping outside your comfort zone, and never becoming complacent.
But isn't there a risk of becoming too focused on hardship, always chasing the next extreme challenge? How do you find the balance between pushing your limits and just maintaining some semblance of normalcy?
That's a great question. And I think the key is to adapt Goggins' principles to your own life and goals. You don't have to run 100 miles or do thousands of pull-ups to benefit from his philosophy. It's about finding those areas where you're holding yourself back,
Mhm.
those mental barriers that you've erected, and then challenging them.
So it's about applying that same level of mental discipline and commitment to everyday life, whether it's your career, your relationships, or even just breaking a bad habit.
Exactly. Taking ownership of your choices and your actions and not letting fear or self-doubt dictate your path.
Now, speaking of fear and self-doubt, Goggins is surprisingly candid about his own failures.
Yeah.
He talks about his attempt to break the world record for pull-ups, how he trained relentlessly, felt totally prepared, and then just fell short.
Yeah, and that's such a valuable lesson for all of us, right? Even someone as mentally tough as Goggins, he experiences setbacks too. It's not about being immune to failure, it's about how you respond to it. Goggins doesn't make excuses. He analyzes what went wrong, learns from his mistakes, and just keeps moving forward.
That really resonates with me. It's so easy to get discouraged when things don't go our way.
Hmm.
But it's those moments that really define us. Do we let failure paralyze us, or do we use it as fuel to improve?
Goggins would say failure is just another opportunity to learn and grow. It's a chance to identify your weaknesses, adjust your approach, and then come back stronger.
Now, despite all this talk about toughness and pushing boundaries, there's a surprising amount of vulnerability in his story, particularly when he recounts his reconciliation with his brother.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Goggins isn't just this stoic, unfeeling machine.
Yeah.
He's a human being who's been through a lot of pain. And his journey is also about healing, forgiveness, and connection. He and his brother had this really complex relationship, strained by all the trauma from their childhood.
hmm
But Goggins actually makes the effort to reach out to mend those broken bonds. And I think that speaks volumes about his growth as a person.
It shows that true strength isn't just about physical or mental toughness. It's also about the courage to be vulnerable, to admit your mistakes, and to seek reconciliation.
Absolutely. And it reinforces the idea that God or philosophy isn't just about achieving some external goal. It's about becoming a better version of yourself, both internally and in your interactions with others.
Now, towards the end of the book, he talks about this concept of scheduling suffering into your day. And I have to admit, that sounds a bit intense.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that's really necessary for everyone? Or are there more moderate ways to apply this principle?
Well, you definitely don't have to go to Goggins' extremes,
Right.
but the underlying principle is sound. It's about proactively seeking out challenges, embracing discomfort, and recognizing that growth often comes from pushing beyond your comfort zone. You could apply this to your daily routine by setting aside time for tasks you typically avoid, taking on a new skill that intimidates you,
Yeah.
or even just committing to a workout when you just don't feel like it.
So it's about finding those small ways to challenge yourself,
Hmm.
to build that mental muscle without necessarily needing to endure extreme suffering.
Precisely. It's about finding what works for you, adapting those principles to fit your own personality and your goals.
And that makes sense, right? Goggins' methods are undeniably effective for him, but they're not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about taking inspiration from his journey and then finding your own path to growth and self-improvement.
Exactly. And I think that's honestly one of the most empowering aspects of Goggins' message. He's not saying, do what I do. He's saying, look what's possible when you push beyond your perceived limits, when you embrace discomfort, and when you refuse to give up on yourself.
It's about tapping into that inner strength that we all possess,
Yes.
that capacity for resilience and growth.
And recognizing that it's a journey, not a destination. There will be setbacks and challenges and moments of doubt. But it's how you navigate those obstacles that really shapes who you become.
It's inspiring to see how he uses those experiences, the good and the bad, to fuel his own growth. It's like he's constantly refining, evolving, and refining his approach to life.
Yeah, and that evolution is something that he really emphasizes, I think, throughout the book. He talks about this idea of continuous learning, seeking out new knowledge, new perspectives.
Yeah.
He's not content to rest on his laurels. He's always striving to expand his understanding of, himself and the world around him.
So it's not just about physical and mental toughness, it's also intellectual curiosity and a willingness to challenge your own assumptions.
Oh, absolutely. He even talks about the influence of, individuals like Scott Gearan, the pararescue man, whose story, initially inspired him to pursue a military career.
Oh, wait.
And it just highlights how, we're all shaped by the people that we encounter, by the stories that we hear, and the ideas that we're exposed to.
It's like a chain reaction of inspiration, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. One person's journey can ignite a spark in another and lead to these incredible transformations. In Goggins, I think, he seems to be really aware of that ripple effect. He expresses a lot of gratitude for those who influenced him along the way and acknowledges that he wouldn't be where he is today without their guidance and support.
It's a nice reminder that we're all part of something larger than ourselves, and our actions, no matter how small, can have a big impact on others.
Now, as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Can't Hurt Me, I'm curious, what stood out to you the most about Goggins' philosophy? What resonated with you on a personal level?
I think for me, it's that emphasis on self-awareness. He's constantly urging us to confront our weaknesses, our excuses, those areas where we're selling ourselves short. It's about taking radical responsibility for your life and not allowing yourself to become a victim of your circumstance.
That's so powerful. It's recognizing that you have the power to choose how you respond to challenges, how you define yourself, and ultimately how you shape your own destiny.
Absolutely. And while Goggins' methods are undeniably extreme, I think there's a valuable lesson there for all of us in his unwavering commitment to self-improvement, to pushing beyond perceived limits, and to embracing discomfort as a catalyst for growth.
Yeah. And remember, it doesn't have to be about, running ultra marathons or enduring this grueling military training. It's about finding those areas in your own life where you can apply these principles, whether it's your career, your relationships, your health, or even just your daily habits.
So as we leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question inspired by Goggins' philosophy, I would ask, what area of your life could benefit from a callous mind approach? Where are you holding back? What are you afraid to confront?
Think about it. Embrace the challenge. And remember, as Goggins would say, you can't hurt you. You have that power within you to overcome any obstacle and achieve anything that you set your mind to. It's just a matter of tapping into that inner strength and refusing to give up on yourself.